here for my March TBR, and that means middle grade March, which I am so excited for. It comes at the exact perfect time, just as Victober comes when we're leaning into all of the darkness and coziness and, just all of the being inside. Middle grade March comes at the perfect time when spring is around the corner and just these books that feed our soul with the gentleness and the sweetness of them. So I cannot wait to tell you about the books I will be reading for middle grade March. And before that, though, I will tell you about the other books I am planning to read in the month. Hopefully, I don't have too much piled on. I do have less other books planned because I just want to go all in with middle grade March. And the first is These High Green Hills. This is the third in the Mitford series by Karon, and it is for the Year in Mitford project I am hosting with Rainey from Rainy Day Reads, Chelsea from Voyage of a Time Wanderer, and Angie from Literary Labors. I have trouble keeping all my names straight. So I'm really looking forward to continuing on with this series. It's just such a bright spot in my reading year, and cannot wait to then discuss the book with all the ladies. And then I'm feeling intimidated by, but hoping to finish, to read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I'm going to be reading this with Katie from Books and Things. And this is part of my Global Classics TBR, trying to read more books in translation. So I'm going the classics route. I don't know if I'm going to like this. I'm going to be honest. I'm feeling pretty pessimistic and expecting to DNF, but I want to at least try it. So we shall see how this goes. Then for my Patreon book club, our February-March pick is The Dead Secret by Wilkie Collins. And I know Janelle from Too Fond of Books read this and really, really liked it. So I want to, I'm really excited to read another Wilkie Collins. He does have a couple that I have not enjoyed this much, but he also has some that I've really, really enjoyed. And I think it's where someone tells a secret on their deathbed and the other person isn't supposed to tell, something along those lines. On Hoopla, I do have access to the audiobook, and it's read by, I can't remember his name, but I'll put the picture right there so you can see it. And I listened to his narration of David Copperfield, and it was so incredibly good. So I'm really happy to have access to the audiobook if I want to double up with that. And yeah, so I will link all the information for my Patreon book club down below. It's really fun. The patrons get to vote from about 4 options. Every 2 months, we pick a book to read together. And then the other months, we do a reading social. And I'm currently working on a series of bookshelf tour videos for them. They're very casual, but giving a tour of all the books on my shelves. So that is like a perk of being a patron. And so I'm looking forward to reading The Dead Secret and then discussing it with them. And then I will be reading Travels in Japan by Isabella Bird. This is for my Literary Parlor book club that I am the host of through the Ebenezer Maxwell Mansion in Philadelphia. And I'm really looking forward to reading a Victorian travel diary where she travels in Japan. It will be really interesting. Isabella Bird has a couple other travel diaries. One is A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains, I think is the name of it. So interested to see what it would be like her traveling in Japan at that time. And then lastly, the other additional book is The King's General by Daphne DuMaurier. And this is in honor of the Stitch and Listen project I am hosting with Natalie from Curious Reader and Emma from A Cup of Books. I hope that you will join us. We are going to be making all sorts of projects. You do not have to be doing some kind of handiwork. You don't have to be knitting or crocheting or embroidering if that is not your thing. You could make Legos if you wanted. I know someone that did it. You could do gardening since it's the springtime. You could do painting, coloring, all sorts of things. Just, doing something while you listen. And it's fun to see the projects that everyone is planning and all the creativity there. And so those are the additional books. Now, let's get into the middle grade March TBR. So I have everything written out here, and I wrote out synopses so I could tell you interesting tidbits and not just, this book looked good. I can't remember what it's about. So hopefully I will have an interesting, kind of take on the books that I want to read. Firstly, the group read is The Brave by James Bird. And this is about a boy who lives on I think it's Ojibwe reservation, and is half Ojibwe. So it sounds really interesting, and he also has OCD and always has to count the amount of words in conversations that he has. So it sounds very interesting, and I'm feeling really hopeful about it. And there's going to be a whole discussion that will happen at the end of the month. And Katie and Krista and Amanda are doing lots of fun things throughout the month for middle grade March. So I definitely want to read that and take part in the discussion. I will link all their announcement videos down below in case you had not heard of it for some reason. And then the prompts. I'm going to go all out with the prompts this year. I found a lot of books I'm excited about for these. So the first prompt is a book with a silhouette on the cover. I did not realize until the host pointed it out. This is a very popular trend with middle grade fiction. So I am going to tell you about the two books that I have picked for this prompt, which just sound so intriguing. And the first is Salt. This is by Helen Frost. This is set during the War of 1812. There are two children that are friends in this, Anaquah and James. And Anaquah is from the Miami tribe, and James is from a family of traders. And so then there's going to be this growing tension, and can their friendship survive this throughout all of that? And it's when there are troops meeting at Fort Wayne. So it sounds really interesting, and just to see their friendship survive, that will be really moving. And then one of the most unique titles, it's called Worzel Gummidge, and it is by Barbara Euphan Todd. This is about a scarecrow. And and the scarecrow is named Worzel Gummidge, and there are two children, John and Susan, and they visit a farm, and they meet this scarecrow, who is supposed to be a really interesting, larger than life kind of character. I don't really know what to expect. I will be doing the audiobook of this. This was published in 1936, and I think there are 5 books. It's a whole series. So I'm feeling hopeful, but I do struggle with kind of children's fantasy. Sometimes it's a lot more plot driven than character driven. But I do know there's a lot of classic children's literature out there that I think I would love. So I want to try this, and hopefully I really enjoy it. And then the next prompt is a book with strong family elements. And I will just do a shameless plug here for my read-along. I am one of the hosts of a read-along of Miracles on Maple Hill. And I am joined by Emma from Bookish Princess, Stephanie from Mrs. Richards Reads, Jess from Dickens and Docs on Instagram, Christy Lewis from DuMaurier, Mary from Happily Ever Esh, and Taylor from The Babbling Bee. Such a fun group of ladies. I was so excited. They all said yes. We are going to be reading this book together and having a Zoom discussion on the last Saturday of the month. We have to determine the time, but if you would like to join in this Zoom discussion, it is free to join, and it's going to be a lot of fun discussing this special book. It's a Newbery winner, and it is about a family that kind of band together after the father comes home really broken after serving in World War II and has PTSD that he is dealing with, and they move to a house in the middle of nowhere with a beautiful countryside around them. And I have to say, specifically for the month of March, it is really fun because it is kind of transitioning from winter into spring, and there's things to do with getting maple syrup and or making maple syrup and tapping trees and all sorts of things. So if you would love to join us, let me know down below, and I will make sure that you get all the information that you need for that. Then I want to try Owls in the Family by Farley Mowat. So I assume since it has family in the title, this is going to have a strong family focus. And this boy already has crows, magpies, gophers, and dogs. And then he gets 2 cantankerous owls that apparently might harass the neighbors. So it sounds really interesting and amusing. It's a classic. I think it came out in the 50s, and I really want to read it. And then lastly, for the family prompt, I want to read The Mighty Miss Malone. This is about Deeza and with her family during the Great Depression. Their father leaves Indiana for work because of prejudice in that time. There are not many people who will hire a man of color for a job. So he just has a harder time finding a job. He leaves, and then she goes with her mother and her brother, I think it is, to Michigan. where they are hoping for more opportunities for work. And I think it's just about this family really sticking together through this really hard time. And it just sounds really, really compelling, and I want to read it. The next prompt was books with travel or adventure. So the first one is one that came out last year by Gail Carson Levine. I don't know how I didn't hear about the fact that she published a book last year, but it's called A Ceiling Made of Eggshells. And it's set, our main character, who I don't have her name written, but it's set during the 1492 expulsion of Jewish people from Spain, which I love how, like, in history, I learned about 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I did not learn about 1492, Jewish people were expelled from Spain. Not something I heard about as history, but her grandfather is someone who has a lot of influence, and so he has this opportunity to meet with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and it sounds like a really special book. So I want to read A Ceiling Made of Eggshells. Then I want to read A Long Way from Chicago by Richard Peck. This is a book about some grandchildren that every summer, and it takes place over the course of 9 summers, they meet their grandmother, they stay with their grandmother, and have adventures with her. Richard Peck is a really prolific middle grade author. I haven't read anything by him, and I really want to. I also own The Teacher's Funeral by him, so maybe I will be doing some bonus Richard Peck books during Middle Grade March. I really want to. And then lastly, for the adventure prompt is Handbook for Dragon Slayers by Mary Haskell. It's about Princess Tilda, who has a crippled foot, so she's always thought of herself as lesser than, but she ends up going on an adventure. There are magical horses, something called the Wild Hunt, and she does sword fighting with a fire-breathing dragon. So it sounds exciting and magical, and I'm all for it. And the last prompt was a fairy tale retelling or a book that has fairy tale elements. And the first one I want to read has fairy tale elements. This is not a strict retelling. And it is called The Extraordinary Princess. And it's about Amelia, who is the 4th sister and so she thinks she's going to have this easy life. She's not going to have to be queen. She's the 4th sister. But then there is an evil uncle, and her sisters, 2 of them are turned into swans and 1 is turned into a tree. And she really has to step up to the plate and try to save her sisters and the kingdom that she lives in. And it just sounds really fun. And then next is Hawksmaid by, I don't have the author, but you'll see the picture here. The Untold Story of Robin Hood and Maid Marian. And this is a prequel to Robin Hood and Maid Marian before she was Maid Marian. Her father is a falconer, and then as the Sheriff of Nottingham rises to power, the teenage Maid Marian and Robin Hood band together to try to bring justice to Nottingham. So it sounded really interesting. And then I would love to try to read The Blue Fairy Book by Andrew Lang. So these are straight up fairy tales. And so that's, fairy tale elements there. These were primarily published in the Victorian era, late Victorian era. The Blue Fairy Book, I think, is the first one, and it was published in 1889. So I have discovered, through reading some fairy tales recently, I do actually like reading original fairy tales in addition to retellings. So that would be fun. I might do those as read-alouds with Peter. I'm not sure. And then the last prompt is a book published the decade you were born. The 80s, they were not really an awesome era for middle grade literature. And I even went to the What We Do All Day, which is a fabulous blog, and she has books by the decade. And there was only one book on the 80s list that I was interested in, honestly. And that is Dear Mr. Henshaw by Beverly Cleary. And Beverly Cleary is an author that, I love her books so much. So I definitely was on board with reading that. I wanted to read that anyway. So I will be reading Dear Mr. Henshaw. I think it's just in letter format, and it's a kid writing to his teacher. I think I might have that correctly. I'm hoping for Wednesday Wars by Gary Schmidt vibes. And then just the other books I'm hoping to read, the other, unrealistic list that I'm hoping to get to. The first is Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth. And it was on my BookTuber favorites, TBR. Katie from Life Between Words loves it. Amanda from The Curly Reader loves it. And it's this girl who has a paper route, and she likes to meet all the people on her paper route, but there is a recluse, Mr. Marsworth, and they start writing letters together. It's also set with the Vietnam War as the backdrop, so a really turbulent time in the United States. Just a really interesting backdrop, and I want to read it. Then Daddy Longlegs by Jean Porter, which is such an unusual name. But I'm going to be reading this, hopefully, I think Megan Hannett and I are going to be reading it. And then my friend Claire, who is a longtime subscriber, and we're going to be reading this together, which will be really fun. And it is about a young girl who, or I think she's a teenager. So it's unusual. It's a middle grade book, but it's about an older kid. But she is, somebody pays for her to go to school. And she doesn't know who it is. And their only request, this anonymous donor, is that she write letters to them regularly. And their pseudonym is Daddy Longlegs. I've heard it said, people that like Betsy Tacy, that kind of book will like Daddy Longlegs. I want to give it a try. Then Unusual Chickens for the Exceptional Poultry Farmer. I am planning on reading this aloud because I have heard it is hilarious. It's just supposed to be exceedingly funny, and it's about a little girl who goes to live with, I think it's her uncle, who's a chicken farmer, and writes letters back home, and it's about the escapades that happen there. And then Letters from Cuba by Ruth Behar. This is about a family, and I think it's a Jewish family where they're living in Poland, but then obviously things are starting to look really bad because this is World War II era. And so some of them moved to Cuba. And so I think it's letters from two sisters writing back and forth between Cuba and Poland. And it just sounds really interesting and compelling. I don't really gravitate towards World War II things, but then there were a couple that just sounded really interesting. Then Eva Evergreen, Semi-Magical Witch. This is about a witch who, I think she's not a very good witch. She's not very skilled at magic. So she ends up somehow at this seaside community, and she starts a magic shop, or like a magic repair shop. So she's hoping to really fix her magic skills by working at this magic repair shop. And it just sounds so charming. And then on the front of Eva Evergreen, Semi-Magical Witch, on the cover, it talked about Kiki's Delivery Service. And I thought, oh, why have I never thought to read Kiki's Delivery Service? And the library has it. So I'm going to be trying to read Kiki's Delivery Service. And then Understood Betsy is one that got pushed back last year for Middle Grade March, and I want to read it. I've heard it, for Betsy Tacy fans, this is one that you would like. It's about a girl named Betsy who goes to stay with her family in Vermont at their farm, and it's just supposed to be very charming, mid-1900s children's classic. I want to read it. And then Skunk and Badger. Kaylee from Books from MKs has really made me want to read this. It just sounds so incredibly charming. This would be another one that I would want to do as a read aloud. Those are all the books that I'm interested in for Middle Grade March. Is it realistic? No. Is it fun to make these ridiculous lists? Yes. So that's why I do this. And then the rest of the year, I don't read that much middle grade, and I always wonder why I don't, but it's kind of fun to go all out. So that's what we're going to do. Thank you, as always, for watching. Let me know if you are participating in Middle Grade March, and I cannot wait to get to these lovely, lovely books. And I will be back for another video soon. Thank you, as always, for watching. If you like the content that you've seen and you are not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button down below. And I'll be back for another video soon. Bye.